Here I will be presenting a case that the mysterious manna of the Bible may actually be the Terfeziaceae and Termania desert truffle. And by doing so, I will be refuting various conspiracy theories that the manna of the Bible was actually some form of psychedelic mushroom. I will be quoting primarily from an article written by Tom Volk called Tom Volk's Fungus of the Month for January 2007. It can be found at the University of Wisconsin-Madison's Department of Botany website. It is heavily referenced, and you can check the sources on his bibliography at that page that I will link in the description section of this video. We will go through the various characteristics of manna found in the Bible, and we will compare them to the characteristics of the Terfeziaceae and Termania truffle. And we will also compare them to the psilocybin and Amanita muscaria mushrooms, both varieties of the so-called psychedelic mushrooms. And we'll let the data speak for itself. Here we go. First, geography. The desert truffle is uniquely found in the Middle East, along the southern Mediterranean coast, the Arabian Peninsula, northern Africa, and Israel. Interestingly, the desert truffle is unique to the exact area that it was said to be found in the Bible, and it is very rare to be found anywhere else at all in the world. This is compared with the so-called psychedelic mushrooms, the Amanita muscaria mushroom and the psilocybin mushroom, who grow almost every place in the world except for the desert. Proponents of the psychedelic mushroom theory realize this, and so they argue that it wasn't the desert that the Israelites were in for 40 years, but rather a lush wilderness or cow pasture. And while I feel that the Bible does make it quite clear that the Israelites spent a majority of those 40 years in an actual desert in the Arabian Peninsula, I will leave this point open for now as we move on. Regarding the next point of sustenance, I need to first point out that the Israelites were said to eat manna purely for sustenance. They had no other food except for manna. In no way does the Bible indicate that the Israelites ate manna for spiritual reasons at all. The proponents of the psychedelic mushroom theory consistently intersperse notions that they ate it to talk to God or some other idea that is completely fabricated. Even the largest proponents of the psychedelic mushroom theory point to no place in the Bible that indicates that they ate it for any reason except for food. So let's look at the desert truffle in regards to sustenance. Desert truffles are nutritious and are particularly high in protein. Antibacterial substances have been isolated from the juice of a variety of desert truffles. In 2004, a Jordanian research team isolated a promising peptide antibiotic from the juice of the Terfeziaceae, which effectively inhibited the growth in vitro of Staphylococcus. Truffles are dried and ground to powder to supplement the regular diet, even though the unique aroma of the truffles cannot be preserved by drying. The nutritious flour is added to a mixture of flatbread, which is then baked and eaten with honey. In times of famine, people have been known to rely exclusively on truffles. Particularly compelling is a story of an Iraqi woman who describes bad times during the 1970s in Baghdad, when her family and neighbors could not get food for months. According to the Iraqi woman, one year truffles were so plentiful that people prepared them in the same way they would normally prepare meat. They ate desert truffles every day for 4 months, cooking them in every imaginable manner. Yet, at the end of this period, she had not tired of them, still finding them nutritious and tasty. Now let's compare this with the idea that manna was the psychedelic mushroom. First, it's important to realize that the Israelis were told to eat 1 omer per person a day of manna. An omer is the equivalent to about 3.5 dried liters, or 3.7 quarts. This is well over the lethal dose of either the psilocybin or the Amanita muscaria mushroom. And even if you didn't die from eating that many mushrooms, you would have little to no nutritional value in either one of those varieties. Now let's look at some more interesting characteristics of manna described in Exodus 16, verse 20. And it says that if the Israelites didn't gather the manna, it would breed worms and then stink. It says also that they gathered it every morning, every man according to his eating, and when the sun waxed hot, it melted. So here's 3 very interesting characteristics. First, if you didn't gather it in the morning, it would breed worms, stink, and then eventually melt. And it makes it clear that the reason that they gathered it every morning was to prevent this from happening. And another characteristic is implied here, that every morning a new, fresh crop would suddenly appear without ever having been planted. Let's take a look at these characteristics and see how the desert truffle stacks up. In the 1st century, Pliny the Elder wrote about the truffles in his book Natural Histories, when he said, "The most wonderful thing of all things is the fact that anything can spring up live and without root." The Jewish Talmud also mentions the truffles. They say they emerge as they are in one night, wide and round like rounded cakes. Exposed and ripe, desert truffles spoil within a few hours and are often overtaken by insect larvae. Truffle collectors hunt for them in the early hours of the morning. The sunlight reflecting off the dewdrops on the sand particles help detect the cracked bumps in the sand, which are a telltale sign of the truffle emerging. Because desert truffles grow so close to the surface, there is no need to use pigs or trained dogs to find them. Experienced truffle collectors can detect an emerging truffle from a distance and often return season after season to the same areas, keeping the locations of their favorite spot a secret. The desert truffle will also smell very bad once it goes bad and breeds larvae. So far, all of these characteristics can be found in the desert truffle. What about it melting? The Hebrew word for melt can also be used to disintegrate into a fluid. This is also true. These characteristics of the worms, the stinking, the melting, the being gathered in the morning, are clearly evident in the desert truffle. Let's look at a few more attributes of manna according to the Bible. In Exodus 16, verse 31, it says, "And the house of Israel called the name thereof manna, and it was like coriander seed, white, and the taste of it was like wafers made with honey." I think I'd be safe in assuming that the Bible is saying that manna tasted good, even sweet, which is indicated by the wafers made with honey remark. So let's look at the truffles and see if they stack up. I'd like to first point out that today truffles are often eaten at the end of a meal, like a dessert, with honey. But of what there can be no doubt is that they must taste pretty good, because they have been sought after as a delicacy for thousands of years by pharaohs and kings and emperors all over the world. The pharaohs of ancient Egypt cherished them as a food, fit for the pharaohs, and arranged for large quantities to be brought to their palaces. The Roman emperors regularly imported massive quantities from Libya and Greece. In the Jewish Mishnah, the first recording of the Jewish oral law, the truffles symbolize plenitude and divine reward, as presented by the 1st century BCE story Hani the Circle. Truffles have always been a popular delicacy. They were craved by rulers of Mesopotamia. In the excavations of the 4,000-year-old Amorite palace in Tel Hari, eastern Syria, archaeologists found remnants of truffles still in their special baskets, as well mentions of them in the palace's inventory lists. They are collected for their unique flavor, nutritional value, and medicinal properties. For these reasons, they have always been in demand, making them a lucrative cash crop for the local populations. In the past few years, the demand for the desert truffles in Europe has been growing rapidly. In fact, Muhammad even referred to them in the Timaridi Hadith, number 1127, when he said, "Truffles are a kind of manna, which Allah the Glorious exalted sent down upon the people of Israel, and their juice is a remedy for the eyes." In fact, their juice is used for a remedy for the eyes to this day. This characteristic is very much in the favor of the desert truffle and not the psychedelic mushroom, because no proponent of the psychedelic mushroom theory seriously argues that they taste good at all, let alone like wafers made with honey, or a delicacy that can be sold to the kings and emperors of the world because of their unique and outstanding flavor. Another interesting characteristic is found in the same verse, where it says that the house of Israel called the name thereof manna, and it was like coriander seed, white. And later on in Numbers chapter 11, verse 7, it says, "And manna was as coriander seed, and the color thereof as the color of bdellium." This, I think, is a very interesting characteristic, because it's telling us that manna is in fact two different and distinct colors. It's both white and the color of bdellium. What's interesting is that once the turmania pushes up through the sand and into the desert heat, its light outer skin turns slightly scaly and bleaches white. This is what the Israelis would see as they were gathering manna, a white protrusion from the sand. The fruit bodies of the turmania themselves are round and tanned to brown and look like small sandy potatoes. I believe that the Terfeziaceae and turmania desert truffle may indeed be the manna of the Bible, and I believe those people telling you manna are psychedelic mushrooms just want an excuse to do psychedelic mushrooms, and that's half of the story.